Hello and welcome, everybody, to another episode of Coaching from the Heart. I am your host, Tyler Thurman, and joining me, as always, is my good friend, colleague, and co-host, Harold Feddersen. Hey there, Harold.
Hi, Tyler.
It's good to be back. We've been kind of hit and miss. We missed last week, so it's nice to be back with you. And uh, So this episode is called Walking with Joy, and I'm actually really looking forward to the topic today. But before we dive into it too deeply, I just want to give people a place where they can find both Harold and myself, as we are both professional transformative coaches. We work with people one-on-one and in groups to help support people to transform their lives, live more wonderful lives, get more in touch with who they really are. Lots of wonderful things like that. And if you're interested, you can find me at www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. I haven't been too active there recently, but you can find my contact information at least. And Harold, where can everybody find you?
I can be found at www.haroldfeddersen.ca.
So simple and easy. I like it. Okay, Harold, so I'm going to toss it over to you, and you're going to tell us what the heck we're going to be talking about today.
Okay. Yeah, well, as our title suggests, we're gonna enter the field of walking with joy, because you and I know from our own personal experience, as well as working with many people over the years, that things can get pretty heavy and pretty serious when we start to take on our lives, because there's sort of a momentum, if you will, carried from that past that does and doesn't really exist into into our present. And when we want something new, when we want to experience life in a new way, there's sort of this default setting that we find ourselves falling back into naturally.
Right.
So it's very easy for things to be serious, and it's very easy for us to get into a conversation where we've seen a brighter or larger way of being in the world, and yet the full blossoming of that hasn't occurred yet. And so it's easy to be in this place where, geez, we should be doing this, or I should stop doing that, or I know better now. I've seen the light, so to speak, and it's very easy to get into a conversation where we beat ourselves up. So I believe our conversation today is about entering into the change from a different place also, like just finding the joy in seeing that we're this unfolding sort of flower of life, if you will.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, full disclosure, Harold and I were struggling with the title for today's show just because we didn't quite know how to all encompass what we wanted to talk about. But I really like what we came up with, or what you came up with. Eventually, walking with joy, which is really, I was kind of going in the opposite direction of just the other, the flip side of the coin, which is sort of the topic of seriousness, right? And so we'll get to the walking with joy, but I think it's probably easier for people to connect to the seriousness because that's where they're at, right? That's where often most of us are at a lot of the time in our lives. That's where we're taught to come from, and we kind of get that furrowed brow and okay, just let's buckle down, let's do this thing, let's get serious, right? That's what people tell us, and then we try to approach that with sort of this self-discovery process, this whether you call it transformation or spiritual awakening, or whatever it is we do. uh, we try to get real serious about that too. And sometimes we don't notice that that's sort of our approach. That's how we're tackling this thing. And it's kind of funny because that's sort of the whole shebang right there in a lot of ways. Is just, if we could just take ourselves and our life a little bit more lightly, everything would change. Everything does change in my experience. It is transformative to transition from weight and heavy and brevity and just serious life stuff to a lightness of being, walking with joy, right? There's a lightness in our step, or if you watch someone walking down the street who seems to be truly happy, right? Or at peace. They've got kind of a spring in their step. They're not slumped over. They're not, we call it depressed for a reason, right? It's heavy. It's serious. It's serious business. And so it's kind of funny, sort of in our approach to something like a spiritual practice or coaching work or, enlightenment, that kind of thing. It's in our approach, it kind of is the essence of the transformation itself, which I always remember one of my mentors, Ken Wapnick, who's passed now, but one of the greatest teachers of A Course in Miracles, in my opinion. People would ask him, how do you know if you're making progress with this course? And he said, oh, that's easy, right? Because you're not taking it as serious. You're not, because things like studying A Course in Miracles or, hiring a coach or a therapist or, it's just got this weight to it often at the start. Hopefully not at the end. I probably haven't done my job if that's the case, but it doesn't have to be that way, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And hopefully Harold and I can, point out some things to make that easier to kind of transition or just open up some possibilities around it.
I don't know where it was, because I've got a number of books on the go at the same time right now. But I was reading about, I think it's in I'm reading this book on poetry. And I think it was in there about how animals, if you look at animals, they don't struggle against what they are. There's just like a squirrel's just a squirrel. It gathers nuts, it runs around in the trees, it mates, it goes and gets more nuts. Like, it's just straightforward. And humans that seem to be the only animal on the planet that questions its own existence and questions sort of its way of being in the world. Right. And I think part of that is simply because we get trapped in our thought systems, believing that, the thought systems and the whole thought structure and the thinking brain is sort of what we are. So and that life is some kind of a puzzle, and if we can just figure it out, then we'd be happy, right? It's that whole if then, that if I can do this, then that will happen. Um, and one of the things that we seem to have lost, particularly in our modern Western culture, is this simple presence of being in life. The simplest sort of thing is just us just being together, human, just being ourselves. We often come up against, that word should. That is such a bugger. I should be this. I should not be that. And it's just all this. What if you just really embraced exactly what and who you are as you are right now?
Oh,
You just allow.
it'd be life changing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think so too.
there's so much judgment, Harold. It's just it's constant. Should is just it's a nice word that points to just how much we judge ourselves. Um, and that's really like you said, dude, like the squirrel or the you know the animals. They don't say, okay, this is how I'm doing things, and I'm a terrible squirrel for that.
I should have gathered those nuts into more of a cylindrical shape in the tree than
Yeah,
the
and
haphazard.
and had I done that, things would be going better for me. I'd I'd be happier. And you know, it's so funny because it's just the opposite, right? It's in our not getting our own way that we are free to just be, ourselves. Be just be, and
It's like
and
there's no.
yeah,
It's
you don't need
just be.
anything after that. You don't need to add anything to that. And because it's really just the lack of judgment, the lack of that weight or that beating ourselves up or that judgment that um, we don't really need to do anything in addition to not doing that. we just it's just we do it all the time, all day, every day. um, and we don't know it largely. A lot of it's unconscious. um, but it's really so simple that they're real. It's really just our thinking, right? And but um, it's resistance thinking, right? It's thinking, putting up a fight with our thinking, right? Like, here's what is. I think we've talked about that in a previous show. Um, I'm sure we have, but here's what is, and then I'm gonna fight like hell against it because I've got some preconceived notion about how things are supposed to be, or how I'm supposed to be in this case, right? I'm supposed to be better. I'm supposed to be funnier. I'm supposed to be more confident. I'm supposed to uh, be smarter. uh, You know, the list goes on, right? I'm supposed to be less shy. I'm supposed to be, a better athlete or better student. There's all these things that we've judged ourselves against. Um, and that's a very serious thing, right? Because we're essentially saying I'm not good enough, Harold. And I know you and I have had probably in our very first show we talked about that ongoing conversation for pretty much every human being I've ever met. We all have some version of the I'm not good enough conversation. And that's a very serious, very heavy conversation. And it's really the only obstacle to our peace, I think. And if we could just learn to recognize that it's there, first of all, and it's not true. So it's a figment, it's a fiction, um, it's a construct of the mind.
The the heavy judgment that we have reminds me of this poem by Dorothy Hunt.
Hmm.
It's called "Peace is this moment without judgment." And do you think peace requires an end to war, or tigers eating only vegetables? Does peace require an absence from your boss, your spouse, yourself? Do you think peace will come some other place than here, some
Hmm.
other time than now, in some other heart than yours? Peace is this moment without judgment. That is all. This moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Peace is this moment without thinking that it should be some other way, that you should feel some other thing, that your life should unfold according to your plans. Peace is this moment without judgment, this moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome.
Oh, that is so beautiful. I was hoping you were going to read it for us.
And I think we all know that we've all had that experience. I truly believe that every single person knows always about what you and I are talking about.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. It's no secret.
no, and it's not sort of new. We're not revolutionizing anything here.
Yeah, yeah. It's old hat.
But there's that moment, and when you've had it, first of all, when you recognize that it's there, and you recognize that you have access to it at any time, then it becomes this practice where we can I be in this moment with this person in this conversation or with myself and be with things exactly as they are, not trying to think that things should be a different way, not trying to think we should feel something different than we're feeling, but just being with everything in the heart space where everything that is welcome.
Yeah.
And it's a practice, and we take it on.
That.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it really is this place of we call it different things. You call it love, you call it joy, you call it peace. But it's this space where all the sort of judgment and it's almost like the whole thought mind structure just falls down and away, and then you're just present with things as they are. And I think that's kind of what our show title is pointing towards, is that walking. First of all, we just experience it like here it is, like, wow, it's in this moment. But then, imagine if you had enough facility with it, you've practiced it enough that you can actually walk in that space. You can move through your life physically, moving through, like room to room, metaphorically or physically, literally, walking through your life, walking in joy, walking in peace, walking in love. Like
Yeah.
what that experience would be like, and it's accessible, you know
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine interacting with your spouse, your significant other, um,
your teenagers.
your teenagers, your kids, your friends, your coworkers, right? Your boss, without judging them, without thinking, you know what, I need them to be a certain way so that I can be okay. That's what we're doing all the time. And man, when we let go of that, that is that's the spiritual practice in my mind. It's not esoteric, it's not complex. It's letting go of judgment. That's basically the Course in Miracles version of forgiveness. Right? We're seeing things as they are, not as we would like them to be, judging them against some made up future or some uh, inaccurately remembered past, right? The good old days, right? I wish things were like the good old days. There's so much we're doing with our minds. It's just that isn't being with things as they are, and it's a transformative experience.
And one of the things that I like about the poem is Dorothy Hunt is talking about the heart space, because you can actually feel it when you go from the heart space where everything is just as it is, and then it's like, oh, but and you just feel the energy rise right up into your head, and then you're like, but really things would be better. Things are great, we can totally, but things would be better if this person would stop doing that, right? And it might be true, because there's the whole thing. Maybe things would work better if we kept driving between the lines instead of over the lines, right? Yeah, there's a truth to
Yeah.
that, but there's also that much more experiential and larger truth of entering our heart space and moving into our life, through our life from that space.
Yeah, I really like that poem, Harold. Thank you for sharing that. Um, you know, uh, One of my mentors, Michael Neal, I think that's where I heard this from. But he used to say, "There's not gonna be better or worse than here. It's gonna be different, but it's not necessarily gonna be better or worse. I mean, it will be because we'll probably think different thoughts about it." But that's just us. It's wherever you go, there you are, sort of thing. Um, yeah, it just makes such a huge difference to begin to identify, like you said, develop a facility for seeing. For me, in my mind at least, and you might think about different, Harold. I'd love to hear. Um, but for me, it's not anything about practicing walking with joy. It's practicing seeing where we're not and stopping. And then we start to walk with joy where we have stopped judging. No, in my mind, it's not like, oh, must stop judgment. Okay, there. Okay, I did it. No, it's not like that. it's it's more it's more like um, just kind of a recognition. Oh, you know what? I'm I'm in a space of judgment, and it's kind of a soft, like, you know what? I don't need to continue to do that. Um, it's almost like you and I, Harold, have talked about a lot in the past, sort of a little willingness. Um, for me, uh, that's a big part of the practice. It's not the act of letting go. Okay, I'm gonna practice. I let it go. It's just, oh, you know what? I see that I'm doing that in my mind. It's almost in the seeing that we're doing it. Sometimes we don't want to let go, right? We've talked about that before too, right? We sit in the unwillingness to let go of it, but we also know that it's us that's unwilling. So that's part of the practice too. But more and more you see it, and it gets easier to be willing to let it go. And as that willingness develops and cultivates, it just kind of naturally happens, it seems like. Um, Now, I don't know if that's actually how it works. That's just kind of how it appears to me, right? Just to give people an idea of how it seems to me, at least.
I think there are the thing about a door.
Mm.
So that a door is a passageway between two spaces. And I think the thing about a door is there are two access points to the sort of the passageway that a door provides, right? Metaphorically or literally. And so when you're saying, there are two different ways to enter the same passageway.
Right.
You can enter it by seeing. You see what it is that you're doing, and then letting go of that. And I think the other way is to say, this is what I want to be, regardless of, like, without even seeing. It's like, this is what I want to be, and then you live into that.
Sure.
And I think
I like that.
it might be valuable to know that you can access it, and I think we probably access it in different ways depending on where we are in our day, because we're very complex sort of thought beings for the most part.
I don't know about my psychology is pretty basic. Judge. Happiness. Judge. No, no, it's not quite that one-sided, but it used to be more that way. But no, I like what you're saying, that there's sort of multiple access points. I think for me personally, I just often find myself having wandered through the door to judgment, like, oh, how did I get here? And then I look within and I say, oh, I'm here because on some level I want to be here, right? That's sort of another conversation, but
that rightness conversation that we had.
Yeah, that ego enforcement. We get to pad our experience, invest in our experience of being separate, special individuals, everything that goes with the ego mind. So there's sort of value to our false self in that space. So in my mind, that's why I wandered in that direction. But I don't. For me, I'm just kind of thinking my way through it. For me, I more and more, I guess, I sort of catch myself in the act, right? Not like aha, gotcha, but I just sort of notice. Gotcha, Harold.
Gotcha.
Like I'm playing thought police with myself.
Yeah,
no, it's not.
exactly.
It's not like that. Although I used to play that game, and that was not helpful. But it's more like I just kind of like, oh, and usually it's the feeling, right? You just feel, kind of like we're talking about, that serious. I can't remember. One of my old coaches or teachers used to say, that feeling when all the sense of humor has left the room. You might want to walk out and come back in when you find yourself in one of those rooms, because it's just got it's got that heavy feeling to it. It's very serious, it's very weighty, and it's not bad or sinful, but it does feel kind of icky a lot of times, even though like you're saying, it serves our ego. But just as personal, give people kind of personally how it occurs for me. That's my access point. I tend to find myself in the room of judgment, and then I'm like, oh, I think I'll leave. Or it's like, okay, I might have got myself here by wanting to be here on some level, but now that I see that I'm here, I can also see that I don't really want to be here. Or at the very least, I don't need to be here, right? And then you kind of can begin to let go. But I also like, Harold, where you're going with just kind of setting the intention. You know what? I'd like to walk with joy more often, right? Um, even if you don't really know what that's like so much right now, wherever you're at in your life. I think everybody's experienced that. Usually you just have forgotten. Maybe it's been a little while, um, or we just have really quick amnesia to kick in. I'm depressed all the time. Yeah, but I just talked to you an hour ago. You seemed happy. you know, um, we like to discount those instances, but yeah, it can definitely go both ways.
There's also an interesting distinction um, within our title that I think is interesting to look at, because one could read the title of today's show, Walking with Joy, as though there's me and I'm walking with joy, and joy is this separate thing and we're kind of walking together.
Well, I do actually think that because my sister-in-law's name is Joy, so
See,
sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Hence the simple confusion, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think it's funny to think of it that way, but I think it's very common that we experience there's me and there's joy as this outer thing.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think that helps to lead to the, well, if I want joy, then I have to, I have to hold hands with joy, and then I get to do, like, if I do this, then joy will be with me,
Yeah.
And we can also hear the title of the show, Walking with Joy, like as though you walk with, like, boy, now it gets wordy, but
It's
you,
ambiguous,
yes,
so it's tricky to talk about, but
from the poetic sort of view, walking with joy, it's as though joy is walking, and that is what you are. So it's like you walking with the joy, not walking with, like, side by side with joy, but walking
it's
with joy.
almost like the joy is walking you,
Yeah.
But it's more of a, it's separate versus it's not separate, right? It's this
Or the
external thing versus it's part of you. It's an essential part of ourselves that we've forgotten.
or the you that you associate yourself to be falls away, and joy is then the thing that's moving through the world.
Yeah, I like that.
It's it seems insignificant, but it's actually the experience of it is extremely different. It's
yeah,
it's the difference between conditional and unconditional happiness, right?
sure.
So if I get the thing I want, then I'm happy, and I'm happy until I get bored with the thing, and then I'm like, well, I need a new thing because this thing's actually not that interesting anymore. And then we're in that cycle, right? What the Buddhists call samsara, when we're in this constant cycle of desire, and then it's the wanting of the thing is what's generating our movement, and the desire for, is the thing that's just out of reach, and then we get it and we have that juicy, yummy feeling, and then eventually that kind of wears off, and we're like, this actually isn't, I don't really want this anymore, and then we got to start the cycle again. It's like, well, what's the new thing I want, right?
Right.
And
It's incredibly circular.
it's incredibly circular, yeah.
In
And there's a completely different kind of happiness, just sticking in the realm of happiness, that
sure.
isn't conditional at all. And I think that's what we're trying to point towards today.
Yeah.
And it's like the poem says, it's do you think peace requires an end to war, or tigers eating only vegetables? That's that same thing, is it's outside, and some things have to occur in order for that peace to exist.
Right. Right.
That's conditional.
Which is the great illusion. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so beautifully put, like that. It's so beautifully put.
Yeah, that poem was just so spot on, I feel like. Um, Nailed it. And that was about peace, right? That's the word that poem used,
That's
right?
the word she's using.
I
Yeah.
think you and I, Harold, like you said, we could easily interchange peace with joy, with love. It's you've got those are like different flavors of ice cream. It's really the same thing at the heart of it, right?
Hmm.
Or different things you could make out of clay, but it's all clay. Um, but it's just there's conditional peace and love and joy, which they're not actually conditional. We've made them conditional in our mind, therefore we experience them as conditional. So they are conditional for us until we see that they don't have to be. And then we can have a different experience.
Well, we've set up our life as though our thought structure is what we are.
Sure, sure.
So if that's how we're living, then it is conditional because there are things that I like and things that I don't like. But when
Yeah,
we sink down, as the poem invites us to do, sink down into our heart space, the identification with who we believe ourselves to be has a tendency to sort of soften or fall away. And then we
uh-huh.
actually get to become uh, the thing that we believe from the other space that we're trying to get. We become the joy, we become the peace, we become the love, and then we move. It animates this meat suit into our what we call our lives, right? But it's actually just it's just the universe unfolding itself in that way out into all that there is.
Yeah, Harold, I really like that you brought up likes and dislikes because my experience of myself personally and people I've worked with, people I've seen have transformative experiences like this that we're describing. Um, it's funny. We tend not to take our likes and dislikes as seriously as we once did, as we kind of embrace that part of ourselves that you're talking about. Um, they're still there, but there's not that same level of attachment to them. There's not that same level of condition to, an investment in them being this thing that means everything to me, right? Whether I get it or don't get it. Um, whereas before, that's the difference that makes the difference, right? Is do I get what I want?
Hmm.
Yes. Okay, I get to be happy. No, not so much.
Not
Um,
so happy.
yeah, not so happy. But there's a real relationship shift with our likes and dislikes, with this deeper experience of um, an unconditional self and unconditional love. That it's just interesting to me that stuff, it doesn't go away. Like I have preferences all over the place, right? But whereas maybe when I was younger, um, and didn't have quite as much a facility for this, uh, for me, not getting something I had my heart set on, which is a funny use of language there, um, was devastating, right? Uh, and now that can still occur, but it really never does to the same degree. Um, and it's just getting more and more in touch with that place, that not walking with joy, but walking with joy. Harold, there's actually there's a line in the Course in Miracles that sort of mimics that statement. It says, if you knew who walked beside you on every step of this journey that you have chosen, you could never experience fear or doubt again. Now, it doesn't mean that literally, but you could interpret it literally as, oh, I'm walking with Jesus. Actually, Christians talk about that, right? Um, but that's not my experience of that. It's walking with the deeper part of myself. That's what's doing the stepping. It's not the me. I think it's how you termed it, Harold. The the version of me that I used to identify with more, or was more heavily identified with. Um, that's just not as as heavily present, and then it sort of, we do our best to talk about something like that, and sometimes the best we can do is, oh yeah, I'm walking with that, but as if it were beside you, but it's, that's just not what we mean. It's convenient use of language, but it's not what we mean. Um, but it could be interpreted in a way that's meaningful.
One of the other things that is part of our trap, if you will, is is when we get trapped in the time, that sort of illusory time. So I was talking to a friend of mine today who is having some conditional discomfort with work.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of gotten in this place where he's like, what's the point? Like this person over here just isn't willing to do what they need to do. So why should I? What I was hearing was, why should I be the person that I have been in the past? And it got me thinking about how easy, especially even with back to that poem, it's so easy to go from this now to just a little bit in the future or just a little bit in the past. Like yesterday they did this, so now today in this moment, I'm still dragging that with me. Or even though I'm here, I'm actually thinking out here in the future.
Yeah.
And it's a trap, because all of that stuff, it all needs to fall away in order for us to sink into that heart space where we can just be the joy that is present.
Right.
When all those judgments just soften and melt down, like hot fudge on a yummy ice cream cone,
Mm.
just sort of melts, just folds and melts away. And it's been hot here, as Sue and I were talking about. And so it's easy to get trapped, and it's very it's easy to step over the seeing of that, even that we're actually dragging this junk from the past, or we're stuck projecting into a future that doesn't exist.
Right.
And all of that sort of needs to fall, in order to walk with joy. Like in the opening of the poem, the wars do not need to end, right? The wars are always this thing about the past, right?
Sure.
That doesn't need to happen. Yeah. Tigers don't need to only eat vegetables, right? That would be kind of the future, in the sense that all of a sudden tigers become vegetarians. That doesn't need to happen. That thing in the future doesn't need to happen. That war from the past doesn't need to end necessarily for us to be able to sink now, into this place where we are now.
Right. Yeah. No, that's beautiful, because that is at the heart of the um, what I call the inside out understanding, right? For there to be peace for me, there only ever has to be peace in my mind. There doesn't have the argument doesn't necessarily have to be resolved between me and this other person. The conflict in the Middle East doesn't necessarily have to be resolved for me to be at peace, or for even the people there to be at peace, right? And that sounds almost too big to contemplate. My heart of hearts knows that that's true, though. Not necessarily easy, but there's something true there that transcends. That's why Course in Miracles talks about a love not of this world. What that really means is a love that doesn't come from out there, or a peace that doesn't come from conditions. That's all that means. It's something within us that we have learned to obscure, that we've, without knowing it, in fairness. My parents certainly didn't teach me growing up, and this is not to diss on them. I love my parents, but I wasn't taught that all obstacles to peace are in the mind. Right? That would be a weird thing to teach a 5-year-old, but in fairness, I never got that until I sort of began to discover it for myself. And that's an ongoing discovery, right? It hasn't fully been discovered yet by me. But I've seen glimpses. And those glimpses have made a huge difference in my life, certainly, and the lives of a lot of the people that I come into contact with. Because it's not something that, Harold, you or I have to show people, because they could never see without us, or that would be sort of conditional, right? It would be conditional based on us being present, right? And offering our services or something like that. No, we're just pointing to something that's already there. That's why so often when anybody has any kind of an awakening experience, it feels like remembering. It feels like I love Marianne Williams' title of her book, A Return to Love. It's not love for the first time. It's a return to home. It feels like home. Because to me, that is home. And that we've sort of learned through life experiences and, modeling other people and, just engaging in the world, that it's the other way around. It's the blind leading the blind. It's all innocent. I've never met anybody maliciously trying to obscure the peace of God. Oh, I know about it, but I don't want anybody else to know about it. I've never encountered that. It's innocent, right? We just don't know. We don't know that we don't have to walk around with the weight of the world on our shoulders. We can, walk with that joy. We can walk with the peace of and the love of God. If, you prefer that language, it doesn't matter to me. But it's a beautiful thing.
And as you said, it's innate. I don't know
absolutely.
if since the last time we talked, I put out a new blog post, and it's looking at it's a poem about geese. Because I had this experience with Canadian geese are back. We call them Canadian geese up here.
That's kind of funny.
It is, because when I was in the States, somebody was like, "Oh, those geese over there." I'm like, "Oh, those are Canadian geese."
You own it up in Canada.
Yeah,
These are ours. We don't have much up here, but we have the geese. No,
and one of the things that I love about geese, actually, the line came from a workshop I was at with David White, and he said the thing about geese is geese always know when it's time to leave and when it's time to return.
Mm.
That it's a knowing. There's a knowing. And I think
it's innate. It's built
it's
in.
innate. And I think we have that as people. I think that's, people who watch our shows, they're tapped into that, right? That there's a knowing. There's a knowing. It's like I'm in a fog and I know I'm in a fog, but maybe I can or can't see the fog, or how to proceed in the fog or what have you. But
Sure.
there's an innate knowing. There's a knowing that this movement, this joy, this way of being in the world is accessible now. And as you were saying earlier about conflict and wars, and the way, because we often get into if we're in a battle or a war with someone, we often it's easy to believe if that person would just stop doing this or start doing that, then this war would end, right?
Right.
And there may be some truth to that, but there's a certain kind of truth also when we become the peace. When instead of having two coming, if this one just lets go, this one is no longer, there's nothing to sort of come up against, because all the judgment has fallen away. So this person can actually be exactly as they are. They don't have to change. Then all of a sudden, everything starts changing.
Mm.
And I think that's something that I think that's not as a not as a reason to become not as a reason to become peace. Well, I can end this conflict if I do that, because then we're just back in the
Right.
trap.
Sure.
But there is something when the judgment falls away and we just allow the other person to be exactly as they are. There we are. The soil from which our relationship is growing is changing.
It can't continue to be the same.
It can't.
Yeah. It's I don't know why this is coming to mind. This is way out of context, but it just popped into my head. In boxing, uh, they call it the rope-a-dope, I think, where one boxer, I think Muhammad Ali sort of, he probably didn't originate it, but he sort of made it famous, I think, where you just let somebody punch themselves out. You just kind of, you don't punch, but you just block. Now, in fairness, we're not really talking about blocking, but you just sort of are. And then there's only one person in the fight at that point, really. Right. And it can't continue like that. It just it just has to change, and usually pretty quickly, right? Either you box yourself out or you knock the other person out, or and this is a horrible analogy, right? But because we're talking about peace, right? But there's something about when there's some kind of relationship of warring sides, right? Conflict. And one person, one side, if you will, stops their involvement in the conflict. They just say enough, enough, and they sink back into that well of their being, and it can't continue on in the way that it had. Sometimes for millennia, right? For decades, for thousands of years. And there's something beautiful about like it's that a saying, it only takes one to tango. It's a sort of a newer side. I think I mentioned it on this show once or twice.
Mm-hmm.
But in relationships, they used to say it takes two to tango, but really it just takes one person to discover home within themselves, to discover that walking with joy is available to us in any moment. And it doesn't necessarily mean the other person is going to start doing that, like, just fall in line. But whatever conflict there was, um, it can't continue in the way that it was before. Um, it could only continue in the other person's mind, but that is very, very difficult to maintain. Have you ever tried being upset with somebody who just won't go along with it?
Try being upset at your dog.
It's hard. Yeah, the dog is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up, Harold. Or your whatever pet, it's just like they're smiling at you and you're like pissed off for a second. You're like, the hell with it. I can't be mad at you.
Yeah.
Right? We've all said that with our pets. And that's a beautiful microcosm of what's available for us in any moment with anything, any relationship, any circumstance we find ourselves in. That peace, that joy, you can walk with it right now, right? You could lay aside the whatever your weapon of choice has been. You can lay that down in this moment or the next and be done. Right? You might pick it back up every once in a while, but be gentle with yourself, right? There's a learning curve to this. But it certainly has changed my life. And it never occurred to me like it was any sort of radical thing that happened, right? It was just a self-discovery, right? Oh, I'm doing that? I'm doing that to myself. I'm so serious. It's so much more enjoyable to just to walk through life with the lightness of who we really are. So Harold, I realize we're coming to the end of our time. And as always, I want to just give you an opportunity to get a parting shot. And I know you love that, so I can't leave it out, even as we're coming up against the clock. So
it's gonna be simple. It's just a practice. The practice of just feeling all of our judgmental thoughts, because really that's all. There's just thoughts. Just feeling them sort of soften and then melt down. And then just enter that space. Just practice getting into that space.
Yeah.
With yourself, with others.
Right. And if that's too hard, just look at what you're doing and be with that. You know what? I really hate this person right now. And I can't let go of it. But I know it's me that's holding on to it. That's all you need to know. It's not their fault. It's not them. It's us. Fantastic, Harold. Thanks.
Thanks, Tyler.
And thanks again for sharing that poem. That was beautiful. I highly recommend. I'm going to go back and listen to that. So I highly recommend everybody else do that too.
And if you wanna read it, it's on my blog. It's from December 2015.
Fantastic. And that's a great segue into how can people find you? Where can people find your blog, Harold?
So you could access my blog just as you could access my Facebook page through my website, which is www.haroldfeddersen.ca.
Fantastic. And you can find me at www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, Harold and I, we do this professionally. And so if you want to walk with joy, as opposed to, walking the serious path, the weighted down heavy path, just walk with joy more of the time. Reach out to us. We'll support you in that. So thank you as always for joining us, everybody. It's been a wonderful show, and until next week, we wish you all the love that's already in your heart. Take care.